Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome from a wet and windy north of England. What a difference 2 days make. It's now, I'm sitting in my house with all my lights on, heating on, a jumper on, and yet I've still got sunburn from the weekend. My name's Mark, and I'm part of the Arts Council England's Digital Culture Network. And this webinar on safeguarding is presented in partnership with the Digital Culture Network and Arts Council England's Children and Young People's team. Safeguarding and child protection are as important now as they ever have been, but with schools still mainly closed and social distancing measures in place across the UK, we still need to think about the way we keep children safe during this time. I'm very pleased that today's session will be led by education and technology consultant Julia Lawrence. Amongst other accolades, Julia has written about online safety for Innovate My School, recorded podcasts about digital literacy and online safety for London Connected Learning Centre, and produced an online safety learning unit for Festival Bridge. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping for today. We've already asked you when you registered whether you've got any questions, so hopefully today's content will cover most of that. But we do have the chat function available, which I will be monitoring throughout the session. So if you do have any other questions, we'll try and pick those up at the end. There'll be about 10 or 15 minutes where we'll have time for questions. So on that note, I will now hand you over to Julia.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. And I'm in a sunny Hamburg, but only for one more day. I think the weather's turning as it is in the UK from tomorrow. So as Mark said, I've worked across the arts and the education sector, so mostly in the area of digital learning. And I'm now a consultant currently working for Paul Hamlin Foundation, Dance East, Festival Bridge, as Mark said, and various others. But until last year, I was Deputy Director of an education technology organisation in London. And in that role, I led on online safety. So I did a lot of strategic advice for schools. I was an online safety mark assessor for the UK Safer Internet Centre, so one of the kite marks that schools can get alongside Arts Mark. So I was immersed in all things online safety. And as Mark said, I've been doing a lot of it since we went into lockdown. So with this talk, I'm going to divide it into 3 areas, looking at the risks for young people and for your organisation online, then talking you through the policies and procedures you should have in place, and then signposting to other organisations and resources that can keep you updated ongoing. And as Mark said, there's time, I hope, at the end for some questions. Now, I need to give you a bit of a warning that the next hour may not be the most fun you've had during lockdown, I'm afraid. There's a lot of information to impart and it's quite dense. So I am going to try and break it up a little and give you just sort of pause moments so that you can consider how some of this might relate to you and your practice and your organisation. So I've scheduled in just a couple of kind of 20-second breaks, really. So you can make an action point or take a sip of tea or go get a chocolate digestive, whatever it is you need to do. So that's the plan. So first of all, what are we protecting young people, your staff and your organisation from? Because clearly the internet is more than just cats or kittens, although I know that it sometimes doesn't seem so. I've pulled together some of the risks into this rather dry looking table here, and there are a lot around online sexual exploitation of young people. So streaming and grooming and revenge porn, so anything that facilitates sexual abuse of children via the internet. And I've also got sexting down here, and this is a growing issue. It used to be just with older teenagers, but actually in the recent years or year or so, I think a significant increasing number of young people of primary age have been spoken to by the police around sexting, and some as young as 4 and 5, so sort of normalizing of this kind of behavior. But there are other things on here too: hacking, geolocation risks, professional and personal identities, reputational issues, as well as addiction and radicalization. So a real variety of issues. And the repercussions of getting things wrong online are very serious. And I just want to look at a few headlines. So this is from just a couple of weeks ago. And it was clearly an issue before we went into lockdown, and most definitely compounded since we have. And again, it's not just older teenagers, but it's also very young children as well. There's a very hotly contested debate going on around the possible harm or not of screen time and very young children. And as I said, sort of compounded during lockdown. There's been a rise in mental health issues with young people and linked to social media use. And this very tragic story from a couple of years ago, the parents were unaware of the bullying that was going on of their daughter, and very tragically, she took her own life. And then this kind of titter-worthy headline. This is from a few years ago, and a school had set up a Facebook account and they wanted their staff to connect with it, which they did. But then almost all the staff, all but one, I think, went out on a Friday night, posted pictures of their fabulous evening out on Facebook, and their the parents and the community were outraged at the images that they posted. So there were lots of issues here, you know, around the professional reputation of those teachers, and then the reputation of that school and the trust building that then needed to go on between the school and that community. And actually, in light of this and other similar issues that have happened around social media and the blurry boundary between personal and professional reputation, more and more schools now have a separate social media policy. Just something to note. And then this, I'm sure lots of you have heard about Zoom bombing and porn bombing. So this is across a number of universities, and this was a headline from just a couple of weeks ago, where there'd been security issues with the university's own infrastructure, and students had exploited that and porn bombed some of the lectures. So it was very distressing for the teachers. It disrupted the learning for the students in those sessions. And obviously, again, there are reputational issues because the universities are going to have to rely on this kind of delivery most definitely into next academic year. So, you know, some very serious issues there. So consider what that might mean for your organisation, for your young people, for your staff, if things went wrong. You know, it is good to think of the worst case scenario when you're doing your risk assessment and trying to put your policies in place, and then you can work back from that. So I've had a go from some of my knowledge about the kinds of things that organisations are doing at the moment. And for young people, it's exposure to bullying online, possibly sexting, and maybe a criminal record. It is a criminal offence to send an image under the age of 16. So there are young people with criminal offences from sexting. Use of images without permission, copyright infringements, and then fines, copyright offences. There might be loss or possibly publication of personal data, so breach of your GDPR policy. There might be inappropriate communication or contact, that's between young people or between young people and adults. And then young people might gain access to inappropriate or harmful material. So think of the Zoom bombing example. And then for your staff, it's kind of a similar list, really. They might also be exposed to illegal or inappropriate or harmful material. They might be exposed to bullying for themselves or allegations of bullying, use of images without permission, copyright infringements, offences, loss of personal data, and then allegations again around inappropriate communication. So for your organisation, like the school that I talked about, there are reputational issues, security of your network and systems. There might be fines via the ICO. Clearly, safeguarding of young people, that should have been top, really. copyright offences, possible prosecution, and then parental school community concern. So, the reputation of your organisation in your locality and having to build that back up again. So I just want to go back to the table that I showed you, because I want you to note that actually most of these cases, it's not really about the technology. So that the tech has enabled it, the tech might have amplified it, the tech might have given access to people that want to do bad things, given them access to more people, but it isn't about the technology itself. So if you think about that example around the porn bombing, there were issues with the university's systems, but the students they made a decision to then porn bomb the lectures. So there are a couple of golden nuggets in this 45-minute talk. So if you take nothing away other than these, I'd be happy if that were the case. But here's my first golden nugget, really, is that online safety is mostly about behaviour. It's not about technology. And it's good to remember this when you're putting together your plan, because you can put touchstones in place, a framework, so that people make good choices, make good decisions, display appropriate behaviour. And you do this through your policies and procedures. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, I just want to show you this because Ofsted and the DFE, so schools, talk about online safety in terms of the 3 C's, so content, conduct and contact. And it might be a good way for you to think about it too. So in terms of content, what are we exposing young people to? Is it age appropriate? Is it reliable? Is it under copyright? Conduct, how are we helping young people to behave appropriately online? Sometimes young people feel anonymous online. Actually, we sometimes feel anonymous online. So helping them to understand how amplifying the web is, helping them to consider what they're sharing, helping them to think about appropriate behaviours, their digital footprint, etc., etc. And then contact is thinking about who they're in touch with, who they say they are, and then considerations around security and sharing settings online. And there's sometimes a 4th C added to this around commercialisation, so understanding about data and data capitalism, that our data has a value, and that if we're not paying with money, then we're likely paying with our data, so helping children understand that too. Here's my second golden nugget. It's having a shared organisational understanding that online safety is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the safeguarding lead. Anyone that's delivering to young people online has a responsibility, and they need to take their stake in that. And actually, the young people need to take their stake too, and so do their parents. And I'll talk about that as well. So this isn't an official pause. This is a micro pause where we can all take a sip of tea before I move on to the second section. And I can take a sip of water. Okay, so that was the doom gloom slot. And now we're into how we can make our organisations safe places. And it's very straightforward. It's a 2-part plan, and 90% of your effort goes into mitigation. So having the procedures in place to try and ensure that things don't happen. But then the final 10% is knowing how to escalate should there be an issue. So step 1 is updating your policies, and the policy is the backbone of your provision. And I'm sure if you're working with young people, you will all have a safeguarding policy. And it might be that adding a section within that safeguarding policy, depending on the scale or the ambitions of what you're wanting to do online, that just adding a section within it is going to be enough. If you're shifting your entire delivery online and you have huge ambitions around it, then you might want to think about having a separate online safety policy. But really, that's got to be a call depending on what you want to do. If you have a safeguarding policy, you're probably aware of some of this documentation, but I just want to draw your attention to a few pieces of guidance. So this centre one here is the statutory guidance that schools adhere to, and I know lots of organisations refer to this in their safeguarding policy, so keeping children safe in education. And this has an ever-growing section within it that relates to online safety. I think it's from about page 96. So this is the current document, but since we went into lockdown, the DfE have also produced this interim guidance. And if you haven't looked at it, you should. It's a live document, so it's ever growing. And there's a lot of content in here that relates to streaming and online delivery for schools, and also how schools and other organisations might support parents in kind of receiving that content and supporting their children and young people. So these are both worth having a look at. And then the government have also produced this advice at the end of April about staying safe online. So 3 documents to take a look at. But I've put together just a few things that you should consider in updating your policies. And I've tried to cram them into one slide, but I'll work through them as separate bullets. So first off, responsibility. So as I said, if you have if you're working with young people already, you'll have a safeguarding policy. And it might be that your safeguarding lead can take on the responsibility for online safety too. If you have capacity in your organisation, then you might want a separate person with online safety. And you should also have a trustee or a governor and a member of your senior leadership team. You need to have some principles in place for choosing the platforms and services that you're going to work with. So for example, you should work with organizational accounts rather than people working with their own personal accounts. Thinking about, paying with your data or paying with money, it is better to work with paid accounts than free accounts, especially working with young people. You need to ensure that the data sharing is GDPR compliant. You need to ensure they're age appropriate, they're secure, or they have decent, secure functionality. You need some kind of training in place. So if you have a safeguarding lead in place already, then NSPCC have a really good course for online safeguarding with young people. I think it's about £35. But you also need to ensure that all staff have a level of knowledge around online safety. So that might just mean producing regular bulletins with some updates for staff around key points to think about around online safety. And there also needs to be a plan to ensure that your staff and tutors can use the agreed platforms and services that you've decided upon here. You'll also need to consider how your staff are going to access these services. So are they accessing via their own personal tablets or phones or laptops, or have they got organisational devices? Now, I know that a couple of organisations I was working with have paid for their staff to have some very cheap tablets, which makes it very clear that, when they're streaming to young people, that they're doing that through the organisational device, that they're not keeping any names and data around young people on their personal devices. But if you're not in the luxurious position of being able to do that, you just need some rules in place so that nothing personal is stored on a tutor's phone. You have some guidance about uploading perhaps film or media content if you're filming sessions, onto the organisational platform as soon as the session's finished. That also covers the data storage. And then you need to think about how you might report incidents, so how they're going to be logged. You've probably got a logging form for safeguarding incidents. You might want a separate tab on that so you can pull out your online safety incidents. And you also need to know how to escalate, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you also need to ensure that your policies and procedures are working. So you need some kind of review in place. So that might be regularly checking the logging form to see the kinds of issues that are emerging, because if they're all around a particular thing, for example, an issue with the software, you might need to tighten up on your training for staff. So it's how do you kind of make this a living, breathing thing rather than just a document that's on the tick list and you've done it and you can put it to one side. Actually, you do need to keep reviewing this to make sure that it's working for you. There are some templates that I'd have a look at. This is a school's online safety policy, and I'm showing you this because it's produced by South West Grid for Learning, and we'll put it on a resources sheet at the end of this talk. And they also run the UK Safer Internet Centre, along with a couple of other organisations. And they have done training for Ofsted inspectors around what good practice looks like in terms of online safety. So this is definitely the gold standard online safety policy template. I would also look at this from the NSPCC. So they've got two. They've got a template document, so an online safety policy template, but they've also got an example document. I think it's from a youth sports organisation, but they're both worth having a look at. But I think for me, it's quite interesting because I think this one here is about 45 pages long, and this is just 2 sides. So, you know, somewhere between 45 size long and 2 size long. But my advice is to kind of read through it and just pick and choose the bits that apply to the things that you want to do and then adapt them for your organisation. That is just fine. Okay, so once you've created your policy and you've got a review process up and running, you then need to put that policy into practice. And a way to do that is to create online safety agreements. So people within your community, and when I say community, I mean volunteers and tutors, anyone delivering your programs, and your young people engaging in those programs. It's a way of them kind of signing up and committing to the things in your policy. ChildNet, who are one of the other organisations as part of the UK Safer Internet Centre, they have a really lovely definition, and they say that the online safety agreement are positive statements about how you and the young people you support want to look after each other online and how you should treat each other online. And I know when I've talked to some organisations about having these agreements, which in schools might be called online behaviour agreements or acceptable use agreements. For some, they feel a bit heavy-handed, you know, because we often work in a culture of trust. But these are in place to help your tutors and staff know the boundaries and to avoid the issues and possibly any allegations. And they commit everyone to working within the terms of the policy. And they're particularly useful when you're working online under pressure because it is a really different experience. You know, delivering today, this session is a really different experience for me. You know, if I were doing it in real life, we'd have breaks and pauses and we could talk about things and there'd be a higher percentage of chocolate digestive to chat, etc., etc. You know, and working under pressure in this way is very different. So it's good just to have those boundaries very clearly laid out. So for young people, the kinds of things you're looking at might be on this list, and I would break them down into things that are non-negotiable for your organisation. For example, this first one, this is a non-negotiable. You're only going to communicate via the agreed platform, so the organisational platform. So if the young person, you know, wants to move on to one of their personal networks, you know, everyone knows that actually that's not acceptable. But you might, this next one, behaving appropriately online, if you're working with a group online, this could be open to a discussion. You know, what is appropriate behaviour online? Is it okay to film part of a Zoom chat and put it on another channel? Is it okay to delete or adapt someone's work? You know, no. So, you know, get the young people involved in talking about it, and then they take a stake in kind of self-monitoring themselves and the group. And I'd also get them to agree to adhering to the organisation's security procedures. So you might have a policy around naming conventions on a Zoom platform. You might not want to have everyone's full name shown. So talk to the young people about that and get them to kind of buy in to your plans, or perhaps they can come up with the pseudonym convention, you know, get them to agree it. You might want to talk about, you know, where they stream from, you know, best not to be doing that from a bedroom, you know, what they might wear for one of their talks, you know, what is appropriate attire, etc., etc. But this final one here, so confirming understanding of how and to whom to report, that's another non-negotiable. So you should have a system in place so that if a young person feels uncomfortable online, if they've encountered something that's made them feel uneasy online, or they've just got an issue, that they know who they can talk to in their organisation. And I would get the young people to actually sign that document. So sign it and upload it, or email it over, or send it if the post works, I don't know. Again, there are a couple of examples. So this is from ChildNet. And they've got top tips and then some bullets that young people can sign up to. And then this is from the NSPCC, so it looks a bit more contractual really, but you can see that first one is about behaviour and that final one is knowing how to report. So these are the non-negotiables. So for your tutor's agreement, you might think about things like only communicating via the agreed organisational platforms, storing personal details of young people in accordance with the GDPR policy, maintaining professional boundaries, storage of film and media footage being in line with organisational procedure, and then staff committing to undertaking any company training in the use of software and also in online safety. And then finally, the reporting one comes into this one too. So all staff knowing how to report, acknowledging that they know how to report should they have an issue with a young person. And I would get parents to take a stake too. They're very used to doing this. If you're a parent of a child in school, I'm sure you've seen something like this. Most schools do it. So it might be that you need them to consent to their device being used for teaching, if there are age restrictions on the application that you want to use, so that a parent needs to download it, you might need to get them to sign up for that. Consent for filming or taking images of the young person if they're under 13. And also agreeing to talk to their child or young person about staying safe online. So you might want to tell your parents and carers the kinds of things that you're doing, and then giving them some pointers as to sort of the conversations that they might have with the young person around that activity. You might want them to be in the room for part or all of the session. I know some music services want parents to be around, or at least popping in for some of them. But I know some sessions where actually they'd rather not have the parents in the room, as they feel that it affects the delivery of the session. And again, for the parents, they too need to know how to report if they have a concern about a session. So making that key to each is that everyone knows how and to whom to report. And you might do this by having a button on your website, or just providing the contact details, or listing the contact details on your website, or putting those details into the contract. So, you know, or all of those things, all of the above. Okay, here's an official pause for just 10-15 seconds. So you can make a few action points, you can add a question into the chat, or you can just take a sip of your tea. Okay, so hopefully your mitigation steps have been so robust that nothing ever happens, but you do need to prepare for the worst and know what to do if there's an issue. So for most of your staff, 99% of your staff, it's going to be very easy, report to the safeguarding lead. But for the safeguarding lead, they need to think through the right and proportional response to the issue. So there are a few questions that they're going to have to ask themselves to know what those next steps might be. So first of all, can it be managed or resolved internally? So is it a legal activity? If it is, then no question, your first point of call is the police. Is the young person or other at risk of harm? Because making them safe is obviously your first priority. Are others involved? Are they at risk of harm? You know, ensuring their safety is your priority. Is there evidence to be gathered? Are there screenshots or devices to be taken, etc., etc.? You also need to think about who else you can bring into play. So the local safeguarding alliance, they're sometimes called local safeguarding boards or hubs, but every local authority has one. I'm sure you're aware of them if you already have a safeguarding policy, but they are your first point of call with the young person in that local authority. But you also might need to involve parents and carers. and know what other support services might be available for that young person, or possibly for your organisation or for your teachers or tutors. You might also need to alert your board or your governing body, and possibly the school if you're working through the school. And then your next step on from that is knowing what you might have done differently. What could you have done differently, and what might you now do differently to ensure this doesn't happen again? So reviewing your policies and procedures and practices, and updating and sharing. So ensuring that people know about the incident, so talking it through in one of your staff meetings, and talking to young people about it too if it's appropriate. This looks complicated, but lots of organisations use flow diagrams or algorithms around sort of safeguarding procedures. So this is, I quite like, it's from Guernsey Education, and it's top left, it says, can the incident be managed under the school behaviour policy? So can it be managed internally? If it's yes, it goes off down this right-hand side, down the green arrows, and if it's no, it goes off down the red. And it also draws in the local safeguarding board, which here is, I've completely forgotten, a safeguarding hub, I think it is, which is the MASH. So it's just a way to think through the steps in the process in a measured way. And I think this forms part of the Guernsey Education safeguarding policy. So as I said, all local authorities have a safeguarding partnership. So here is my local one in Lambeth. And you can see up the top here, it's got a red button, so you don't need to go any further than the header. You can report a concern. But you also have contact details here, and you can email if you want. They also produce a really useful regular newsletter, so you can subscribe to that. And they have various resources and content on here for parents and carers, for young people, and for others working with young people. And every local authority has one. So if you haven't scrutinised your local one, then I would do so. And if you've just got their sort of reporting details on, go and have a look at their website, because there's normally a lot of really rich stuff on there. But there are other places you can report to. I don't know if people are aware of CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command. It's part of the National Crime Agency, and it deals with anything relating to online sexual abuse of young people. So young people can make a report here, but adults, tutors, teachers, parents can also report on here. And there are lots of resources which they've been adding to during lockdown. So again, a wealth of stuff on here to look at. And Childline and the NSPCC both have reporting lines. This one is for sexting, so young people can report, and Childline can help get images taken down, but there are also support materials on here. This is my go-to place. So Parent Zone, I think, are a fantastic organisation. I don't know if any of you parents out there already know about this organisation. If you don't, do have a look at it. So there's loads of free stuff, and they have a free newsletter. But they produced this rather brilliant blog last week, I think. And they've listed out all the places you might want to go for additional help with young people. So some of them are around online safety and wellbeing. So they've got CEOP there, Childline, but others in here too. Mental health of young people, various organisations, child sexual exploitation and abuse, as I've just said, but also addiction and substance abuse, cyberbullying, and then some general resources around it. So this is one to bookmark or print out and stick on your notice board, but it's really useful. So with escalation, it's around being prepared, thinking through that worst case scenario, having a plan, knowing who else to draw in, and then learning the lessons. And another 20 seconds or so, just so that you can make some notes, or, as I said, put a question in the chat. And then we'll move on to the final section. Okay, colleagues, so where to go for help, further advice and guidance? There are lots of places out there, and my first top tip to bookmark is from the Digital Cultural Network. So they've produced a resource around online safeguarding. They've drawn together various things from all sorts of organisations, and we'll also add in the links from today's talk as well. So that's on their website down the bottom with all the other resources. So bookmark this. But I noticed when many of you signed up in the questions section, lots of you were asking for advice about streaming and appropriate applications to use with young people. So my go-to place around that is this. It's NetAware, produced by NSPCC and O2. And it's basically a review site for all the latest networks and applications and games that children are engaging in. So it's ever growing. And I like it because it has a really clear interface. So for example, if you click on Zoom, what it immediately gives you is the official age rating, which is useful when you're wanting to choose an application to work with young people on. But it also gives you an expert view of the risk. So you can see sort of it's fairly moderate risk on here, and then it gives you a few top tips for staying safe. And some of those are about the settings, so you can see here restricting screen sharing, but it also in all of them has this, so talk to your child about what they're sharing. So it's not just about the security, it's also, you know, it's about the behaviours. So it's talking to the young children about what's appropriate online, and all of them have this and give some prompts around this. So we can compare that with House Party, which obviously is, you know, all over the place at the moment. So it has a younger age rating, 13, but when you look at the expert view of the risks, you have much higher risks of inappropriate content, sexual content, and bullying, because there are all sorts of, or at least there were when it first launched, all sorts of security issues with House Party. I think when you sign up to it, it automatically defaults to sharing your location. So you have to turn that off within the app. And I think it doesn't have a reporting button. So there are, you know, and I guess, I don't know if any of your young people are playing Fortnite, but House Party is designed by the same people that designed Fortnite. So it's more sort of a gaming platform than it is designed to be a communication platform. So you know, really good to look at the comparisons between the two, because I think Zoom gets a lot of bad press. But then if we go to Skype, 13, back to 13 with the age rating, but you know, we're back to also sort of much more moderate risk. But all of them have this section, which is definitely worth reviewing. So in terms of recommending platforms and services, you know, there are just tons of services that allow you to stream and share and connect, and none of them are perfect. So it's really hard to say that one is better or safer than the other. They all do slightly different jobs. And there are probably benefits and risks to all of them. So the first question is, what do you want to do? You know, lots of schools are using Teams. I'm sure lots of you are using Teams and Google Meet. And that's because loads of schools are either using 365 or Google Classroom, so they can integrate those into their learning environments. Some schools are using Zoom for synchronous, so in real-time connection with their students, but they're combining it with things like Loom, which is a video messaging service. So you can create videos and then store them so people can revisit them. So schools might put content on Loom, ask students to work through them, and then perhaps arrange a point in the week when they might then meet via Zoom or another platform to talk about that. But there are others too. Big Blue is used more by American schools, but it has kind of a whiteboard functionality, so you can notate as you're going along with that. Whereby or Whereby, I'm not quite sure how you call it, has a free and paid version. I quite like this one. I use this for my personal meetings, so you can get a customized URL and you can share screens and you can chat and you can lock rooms. I'm not sure if you can record sessions except on the paid version. And then Jitsi is an open source and and free. So it's a video platform. I'm not sure, again, if you can share screens, but I know lots of charities use Jitsi. So, you know, there are pros and cons to each of them, and they all do slightly different things to each other. So instead of recommending one over the other, I think what I need, or what you need, are a guiding set of principles. You know, does it do what you need it to do? What security settings are built into the platform? Do your staff know how to use it? Are your young people clear about the rules of engagement? And then use, review, and refine your approach. So talk to your tutors about it, you know, get them to feed into your practice around it, and also talk to the young people about their experience of it as well, and let that shape what you're doing. There are a couple of places that have produced some really good advice around security guidance. So the National Cyber Security Centre has produced these posters, which are really handy, quite succinct. And then if you haven't seen this already, it's on the resources document that we're going to share, but this is from NIMAS, and they've produced this from one of their music tuition projects that was delivered online around synchronous online music tuition. So again, it doesn't recommend platforms, but it talks you through the whole process of delivering, of synchronous delivery online. So it's a really good document. One thing that I would definitely bookmark, and I just draw your attention to, because you might want to put it into your policy as a place, as a kind of place to go in an emergency, is the Professionals Online Safety Helpline. So this is run by the UK Safer Internet Centre, and it's for sort of unresolvable issues, not necessarily just working with young people, so the issue being about the young person, but it can also be about the professional reputation of your staff, or the professional reputation of your organisation. So for example, a couple of years ago, I was working with a school, and a parent had posted some really inappropriate stuff about that school on a Google review. And we worked with Professionals Online Safety Helpline, POSH, and they were able to get that taken down. So worked with Google to get that taken down. So it has connections to the platforms and services that us mere mortals would never have access to. So it's definitely one to bookmark. And there are loads of places to go to keep up to date with stuff. As I've talked about, Parent Zone, Internet Matters, they're run by the big commercial companies, BT, and I think Google are involved in it. Parent Info, UK Safe Internet Centre. There are loads of places to go. I would pick one or two, sign up to their newsletters, and keep up to date that way. And I think my final word to you is that there is a lot to consider around online safety. There's a lot to think about, and there are definitely some serious issues to navigate. But, you know, technology enables you to do amazing things, to engage and connect and make and promote and create. So I don't want you to be put off by what I've just talked about. You know, put in appropriate provision, obviously, and then go ahead and do some great stuff with young people online. So I hope that I've helped you in some of that thinking. Mark, I'm going to pass back to you just to see if we've got any questions. I can't see it from my platform. I can't see what's coming in.
The chat was really busy, Julia. Look, I think we have a lot of experts already watching this webinar, so a lot of the questions were getting answered as they were getting asked.
Okay, great.
A few specifics that were allowed. Bear with me 1 second. I mean, I think the first question we got asked was, is there anywhere where there's a glossary of all of the terms you use? I think one of your first slides included sexting and other terms, and somebody asked whether there was somewhere where there'd be a glossary of that available. Have you seen one?
I haven't, but let's look out for one. And if we find one, or if anyone wants to add one in the chat, we'll happily take it. But if not, we'll find one and we will put it in the resources. Is that all right, Mark?
That's absolutely fine, yeah. That sort of leads on to the next one, which I'll answer. A lot of people have asked whether we'll be supplying the slides. Now, I don't think we will be supplying the slides in the form they are, but what we will be doing, the video of this webinar will be constantly available from our YouTube channel, and we will be extending the resource that we've already created to include a lot of the information that Julia's spoke about today. So there's a lot of ways that you'll still be able to access this information. Somebody asked, are there good examples of a safeguarding statement available to use as possible sort of templates?
Um,
One, I can't remember off the top of my head where it was, but I don't know if that's worth. Is it something that you could do by just going to getting an organisation's existing template and statement and changing it for your own, or does it have to be?
Well, I mean, the two template policies that I showed, so the one from the UK Safer Internet Centre and the NSPCC. I mean, I'd look at both of those. I think they're both really strong. But as I said, you know, what one is schools have to have massively robust procedures in place. So it's like your watertight policy is that schools one. But actually, that's probably way more than you're going to need, which is why I showed you that NSPCC one as well. So I would start with the NSPCC one, which I think is just fine. But, you know, depending on what you want to do, you might find you can pick and choose some bits off the other one and just adapt it for your organisation and your provision. And I would also say that as your provision grows, you should keep reviewing your policy. I noticed on Twitter, there was, this is about schools, you know, having to shift all of their delivery suddenly online, is that there was a safeguarding lead for a school. And at the end of April, he said he'd already updated his policy 3 times to try and adapt to, you know, what the school was wanting to do online. So, you know, people sometimes see policies as like a tick box thing. It's like something that's got to be done, but actually they need to be a living, breathing thing that underpins your practice. So it has to help you. So you need to keep referring back to it and adapting it as your provision grows.
And there's a couple of sort of more broader questions that came up. The one was around about this. Obviously, this webinar is mainly about working with children and young people. Is the guidance that you're giving pretty similar if you're working with other vulnerable people, say adults?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Sorry, I was a bit hesitant then. Yes, definitely. And there are some places to go. So if you're working with vulnerable adults, I noticed that the Creative Health and Wellbeing Alliance put out some guidance. So they produced a document with the Arts Marketing Association and Rio, the Bridge organisation in Cornwall. So that's particularly around working with vulnerable young people and adults. And also I noticed a really good blog. We could put this on our resources page as well. A blog that kind of collated various resources and materials from the space. So that they were talking particularly about working with vulnerable young people and adults. So looking at how to pick your platforms, looking at good practice around accessibility and things. So we can put some of these onto the blogs. But yes, my advice stands around working with adults too.
Cool. I think as a last question, this is slightly off topic, but it might be worth talking about a little bit. Obviously, there's a significant proportion of young people without access to devices and connectivity. How should organisations deal with this kind of situation?
Yeah, and you've probably read tons of this in the press. You know, digital inequality is a thing, and Nominet, a charity, put out a report last year, I think, Digital Access for All, and it showed that about 11% of young people weren't accessing the internet via a computer. So they were accessing via a phone and probably with a data package. So the government have been quite slow to react, but they have put a scheme in place. So vulnerable young people can access laptops, but it's been really slow. I think I'm not sure how many have gone out, but it's a very slow process. And there are various charities that are trying to deal with this as well. And I think everyone needs to keep this in mind. You know, is that they can't shift their entire provision online because you would be excluding a significant chunk of of young people with that. So I know that schools have got round it by doing things like putting prompts online, but for offline activity. So the young person doesn't have to rely on having a device or decent connectivity to be completing the task. I mean, some schools have stepped back from putting anything online because of it, because if they're delivering in areas with very high levels of deprivation, because it's not just about young people having a computer. There might be a computer in the house, but if it's a young child, then the older sibling might have access to it, or there might only be one computer and the parent needs it to be able to access work. So I think, you know, it is a serious thing and it needs thinking about. But I think putting prompts online for offline activity is probably the way to go.
Great stuff. That's all for the questions, Julie, I think. Is there anything you want to say to summarize what you've said?
Oh, yes, I have got a final slide. Yes, I've got. So my checklist for you all is to update your safeguarding policy, create online safety agreements for all, provide training, both technical and safeguarding, agree a reporting and escalation system, and then just keep reviewing it, review, adapt and update. And don't let anything that I've said in this talk put you off. You know, you know, the risks are there, but you need to think them through, have your policies and procedures in place, and then just get on with it. Brilliant.
Well, as I said, thank you, Julie. That's been really helpful. I think gone by the chat, a lot of people have found it really helpful as well today. Everyone, if you've got other people that you know who'd like to see it, as I said, this video will be available afterwards to watch, and we also will send around links to the resources that we're talking about today as well. Just a few things to wrap up with today. Obviously, I'm part of the Digital Culture Network, which hopefully you know about, but if not, we're a kind of a support team within Arts Council England to help organisations with their digital ambitions. So I think over the next few months, over the summer and the autumn, we'll be running a series of webinars on a number of different subjects. And if you want to keep up to date with those, please sign up to our email newsletter. And we are available for direct support as well. And the best way to get in touch with us initially would be to email us at digitalnetwork@artscouncil.org.uk. But we will supply all these links in the description below. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.